Welcome to our first cross-cohort innovation panel of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. My name is George Vradenburg. I am chairman of the board of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, and I am pleased to have you all here today and to welcome both members of our team, who I'll introduce in a second, and members of the panel who are going to discuss some very innovative and intriguing work in the area of the effects of climate change and other environmental exposures to brain health. Um, just as a word of introduction about the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative and our purpose. With that, the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative was founded at the World Economic Forum in 2021. It is intended to be a global mechanism and platform in the same familial line as Gavi and CEPI, designed to attack what the World Economic Forum and we believe to be a global health issue of sufficient importance or comparable importance to infectious diseases. And that is the impacts of brain health on economies and on society, with a focus on Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases. Um, that is the purpose of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, which is to link what is happening in low resource settings around the world with those in higher resource settings, to exchange the innovations that are occurring across the globe in the scientific and policy work that is occurring against these diseases. We know that there has been an over-index, to say the least, on research in white Caucasians populations, when most of the folks that are experiencing Alzheimer's in their families are not white Caucasians. As a consequence, we need to understand the diversity of the world and its legacy populations so that we can understand the full gamut of the causes and impacts on brain health and on neurodegenerative diseases of a wide variety of different conditions around the world, and potentially to identify interventions that are going to be much more effective in differential populations around the world. So with this notion of linking what is going on around the world and scaling the efforts that are occurring in the world in different ways, we are very pleased to have this first initial cross-cohort innovation panel, which is actually going to be looking at the impacts of certain kinds of environmental exposures in different countries of the world, in different contexts, and measure them in a way that permits us to assess the effects of those exposures on brain health and on potential neurodegenerative diseases. I am very pleased today to introduce Vaibhav Narayan, who is an executive vice president of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, charged with work in the cohorts area. And he will introduce a panel of prominent individuals from around the world and different countries of the world who are doing potential work here by linking and then scaling their work and understanding the issues of environmental exposures on brain health. With that, Vaibhav has a background at J&J and now works with us and with the Mental Health Mission in the UK. So he is an expert in a variety of ways in the brain health area, and we are proud to have him with us and proud to have him moderate today's panel. Vaibhav, take it over.
Thank you, George. Thank you for the introduction. Welcome everybody on the panel, my colleagues and everybody on the webinar from wherever you are. Today is, as George mentioned, what we call our first cross-cohort panel, innovation panel, with the exciting topic of impact of climate change and brain health. As George mentioned, there is an incredible need to collect diverse data into Alzheimer's and brain aging research, data that comes from people who are genetically diverse, who are exposed to diverse risk factors, who have diverse lived experiences, who have diverse comorbidities, etc. And we at the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative have put together a global cohorts program that grows around the world and generates data from diverse cohorts to fix this diversity gap. And this data set that we are collecting will be made available via ADDI to the larger research community, and we believe will help in solving key problems like understanding the heterogeneity in the disease, coming up with early diagnostic biomarkers, new drug targets, etc. But there is an additional ancillary opportunity to really utilize this global cohort program at the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative to really understand the impact of climate change on brain health. And let me give you a few reasons why we think that we can contribute meaningfully at DAC to this important problem. First of all, our global cohorts are scattered around the world in regions and locations where there is acute impact of climate change already happening locally, as you will hear from some of our colleagues. And therefore, we have this tremendous opportunity to really study the impact of climate change stressors on brain health. Secondly, through our global cohorts program, we are solving what I call an important measurement problem. Unlike in other disease areas, like cardiovascular disease, where you can measure things like hypertension, or in diabetes, you can measure blood glucose, there is not a simple way to measure brain health and cognition that is valid across cultures, languages, and education levels. We believe that through our global cohorts program, we will actually be well positioned to come up with a more harmonized and standardized way of measuring brain health and cognition around the world, which sets us up to really explore the impact of various factors on brain health and cognition. Secondly, in addition to measuring brain health and cognition, we will be more broadly measuring social determinants of health, other socioeconomic factors, which we know are also important mediators of the impact of climate change stressors and brain health. And finally, in our global cohorts program, we are also measuring various climate stressors, whether at the individual level through wearable sensors, whether at the household level through household sensors, or more broadly, using regional strategies like satellite sensing, etc. So we have a unique opportunity to really bring together the various multimodal data that is required to address this important problem. Finally, I should say that none of this we think would be possible without having a really wonderful set of collaborators around the world, some of whom you're going to meet today, who are working on the ground in their regions, generating the data that will make it possible and is making it possible for us to study the impact of climate change and brain health. And with that, I would like to introduce our panel. They will originally go around and give short introductions to themselves and also about the work that they're doing. And so I would like to start with Karen Blackman. Karen, please go ahead, introduce yourself and your work briefly, and then we will go around the virtual table.
Thanks, Vaibhav. I really appreciate your introduction. And as a clinical neuropsychologist, I care very much about measurement, and I'm excited about this initiative because I think it will solve some of the perplexing measurement problems we've had across the global South. And so I'm very happy to be part of this. I'm working in Nairobi, Kenya, at the Brain and Mind Institute at Aga Khan University, where we've received Davos Alzheimer's collaborative funding to validate a suite of blood-based biomarkers, saliva-based biomarkers of Alzheimer's and related dementias. We're also trialing and validating a set of digital cognitive tools, functional assessments, along with working closely with medical anthropologists to help us understand why things are working, why things may not be working, so that at the end we have tools that we believe are truly sensitive and specific to Alzheimer's, as well as related dementias and the possible inflammatory stressors that we know can increase the risk, especially in low and middle income countries. So we're very happy to be part of this cohort and to receive this funding to launch this work, and excited about hearing from the other groups what they're doing and harmonizing our efforts for the greatest impact.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. Just a quick note, if you could just get closer to the microphone for the rest of the panel, that'll be great. But thank you for your introduction. Katerina, would you like to go next, introduce yourself and your work a little bit? Thank you. You're on mute, Katerina.
Thank you. I am Caterina Ferruecho. I am a medical epidemiologist. I am the director of the MAUCO, this Maule cohort. This is a cohort of 10,000 people from an agricultural area in central southern Chile. It's a poor population. The mean school is 8 years. And we are in our 11th year of the cohort. And we are, soon we have to apply for another 10 years. This is a state-funded cohort, but it's a very big competition to get the funds. So the cohort is, we enroll people age 38 to 74 years, 10 years ago. So they are all growing older. And at baseline, we did a very complete health risk factors assessment in all the areas, including environmental measurements and sampling, the characteristic of their households, and also we took a lot of tests, cognitive tests, depression, anxiety, violence in the neighborhood, and violent experiences, etc. And also the health history. And we created a very large biobank with almost 30 aliquots per person at the enrollment of blood. And also we took urine and saliva and stools. This biobank, so this project is run by the two main universities in Chile. My university, that is a non-for-profit university, Catholic University, and the University of Chile, that is the main state university. So we are collaborators in this huge, for us, it's a very huge project because it's the only cohort of these characteristics. And besides the huge biobank, we also have a very complete data bank. We are linked, our participant, with the state information for them. So any hospitalization or death, we are linked with them. And I'm very happy to collaborate. We did have a lot of cognitive related study, evaluation, baseline evaluation, but this will be the only study in which we will go deeper in evaluating and with more modern cognitive examinations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina, for your introduction. Mohammed, can I go to you next? And why don't you introduce yourself and your work a little bit?
Thanks, Vaibhav. I'm Mohammed Salama. I'm currently professor at the Institute of Global Health and Human Ecology at the American University in Cairo, in Egypt. And I'm leading the Egyptian Healthy Aging Study, which is an HRS longitudinal aging survey, aiming to recruit 20,000 Egyptian population above 50, where we're studying several determinants of healthy aging. And actually, it's called Al-Sahha, which means health. And Al-Sahha is actually a feeder for another parallel initiative, which is the Egyptian Dementia Registry. So those who have been identified as dementia or have cognitive impairment are transferred to be subjects for the Dementia Registry. And both of them hopefully will be upgraded to start the North African Dementia Registry in collaboration with Davis Alzheimer. So in addition to collecting clinical data and socio-economic data, we're also collecting biological samples. And one unique feature, I think, in our cohort is linking to environmental exposure. being a neurotoxicologist in the first place. So I'm interested in linking external exposure by different means to what we call internal response in terms of biological changes. That's why we are starting the Exposome project for dementia patient, collecting different environmental contaminants. And also another interesting initiative that has been funded by the American University Climate Change Program is to refine the Green Brain Capital, which is a model developed by Brain Capital Alliance and other colleagues. And now we are working on identifying several what we call green brain skills that can impact the climate change in a different way. This is in a nutshell what I'm doing currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'll now turn to our colleagues from Colombia, Alfredo and Mario. Either one of you or both of you, can you please introduce, well, both of you introduce yourselves, and one of you please introduce your program as well.
Freddy, please go ahead.
Okay, my name is Alfred Gonzalez. I am from Colombia. I am a professor at Colombiana University of Department de I am coordinator the master program in clinical neuropsychological. This cohort is in the southern of Colombia. We have interdisciplinary teams, different professionals in neurophysiology, neuropsychology. And in this university, program in environmental psychology. This cohort is 1,000 of people. The principal problem in the south of Colombia is that the prevalence of dementia is higher, is 23.6%. There are different risk factors: low level education, low socioeconomic status, different comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular and cerebrovascular disease. And the mild cognitive impairment, the prevalence is higher too, is 53.6%. And other problems in my country is the use of pesticides, because maybe for the low education that the people protocol for use the pesticides, and other problem in the they use the glyphosate. And other problem in this region is the armed conflict, because produce violence, displacement. For this reason, this region is interesting for study. To identify different risk factors, to identify the relationship, the use, the pesticides, and cognition. And I am excited to participate in this meeting. I am interested in collaborate with other groups in different countries or universities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mario, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Mario Parra. I am a professor in psychology at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. Also, I work in the UK. I have been collaborating with the University Sur Colombiana in Colombia, where Alfredi is based, for many years. Also, I have been leading initiatives in Latin America and the Caribbean countries to fight dementia, particularly focusing on dementia. I am very interested in cognitive neuroscience approaches to aging and dementia, with a very special interest in cross-cultural aspects as well. My work has largely focused on the development of methodology that can help address these inequities, disparities in dementia for many years, focusing, as I said, on cognitive neuroscience, but always aiming at affordable, scalable, accessible solutions that can help us harmonize research and clinical practices across the global north and global south. So therefore, I'm very excited to be able to join this initiative as a collaborator, learn from the various colleagues that are scattered all over the world. It's a unique opportunity to really look at the picture from holistically, and can't wait to see this collaboration flourishing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. welcome, Bill. I would like to give you the opportunity to just introduce yourself, introduce IHME and its main mission, and your interest in brain health and climate change.
Great. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks Vaibhav, thanks George and Irene and everybody who's been involved in our collaboration from the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative side. I just said in the chat that I'm at the American Academy of Neurology conference and was in a meeting that ran late, so I'm sorry for the background noise. I'll be on mute when I'm not speaking. But IHME, for those of you who don't know, is the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. We're based in Seattle. We're a health metrics research center where there's really not much kind of like us in the world in terms of measuring all the time trends for every country, for everything that impacts our health. And we have country partnerships in 165 countries now, and 11,000 different collaborators who may even include some folks in the room who are part of the scientific effort to then publish on different diseases, be they neuro or cardio or cancers, or even things like gun violence and injuries and the effects of climate change. So we're very inspired by the work that many of you are doing in the room to be specific about neurotoxins and specific about different ways in which we see the risk factors translating to the disease impacts. And so thank you so much for being part of this collaborative with us and allowing us to get deeper into the work.
Thank you, Bill. So that was a terrific round of introductions. And as you can see from the introductions, that we have cohort partners around the world working in specific regions, generating some very unique data that is relevant to both understanding brain health and aging, but potentially also relevant to understanding the impact of climate change and climate change-induced stressors on brain health and aging. And with this introduction, we would like to sort of get into a bit of a Q&A round and go around this panel and ask them to answer some of the questions that I'll be putting forward. If others on the webinar have questions themselves, they can please put it in the chat as well. So I think earlier I did mention that the huge opportunity here is to really solve the measurement problem and really go ahead and measure both the brain health and the environmental stressors in different parts of the world. And what I would like to explore with this question is that what are the opportunities that we have to really harmonize this kind of measurement, across different regions, across the world. So as Bill just said at IHME, that we can actually start understanding the different covariates and start understanding the impact of climate change on brain health in a more broader sense, right? And so that's the sort of the crux of what I want to ask. And more specifically, I think what I would like to ask is that how do we even define brain health, right? We can define cognition, but brain health is a broader issue. So I would like to ask each of the panelists, how are they actually defining and measuring brain health in their particular region and in their particular cohort, with the subtext being that can we actually harmonize this measurement across the board? Similarly, I would like to ask each of the cohort, how are they measuring the different environmental stressors? Maybe there are different environmental stressors operating in different parts of the world induced by climate change, and I know there are, but is there something that we can do which is more standardized and common so that we can actually integrate the data and cross mine the data at the end of the day, just really getting to the signal from the noise. So again, in a nutshell, I want to ask each of the panelists, how do you define and measure brain health, and what kind of environmental stressors do you measure and how? And maybe Karen, I'll start with you, since I know you have a point of view on defining and measuring brain health, and then I would like other panelists to please add to what she says and join in with their answers as well. Karen?
Okay, thank you. So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Better, yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm a clinician and a scientist. And so I should say that when we think about the problem of measuring cognition and other brain health outputs, we think about what's going to be sustainable over time in low and middle income countries. So we want the cutting edge tools that take advantage of technology, but we're also thinking about no matter what we do, we have to make sure there's a direct channel into health systems so that clinicians can use these measurement tools to improve diagnosis, detection of disease, eventually treatment of disease. So we think about, using digital tools, but we also want to include some open source and more classic neuropsychological tools so that we can link it to longstanding literature on what we know about neurodegenerative diseases, but also stay at the cutting edge of measurement, which we know is rapidly changing, and new opportunities are opening up to do cross-cultural and cross-country measurements. So I'll say that we've chosen a battery of tests that involve some digital tools, speech biomarkers, which have immense potential, but also some open source classic neuropsychological tests that can be harmonized with large existing data sets, like the HRS study that Dr. Mohammed was talking about. So we think about a lot of different things in our test battery. Another issue in cross-cultural neuropsychology is, do we have to use the same measures, or can we agree on the domains we want to assess and allow some flexibility on the test side, and then on the measurement and harmonization side, do different psychometrics to then harmonize the whether someone is impaired or not, or the degree of impairment in each domain. And by domains, we think, of course, in cognition of memory, language, attention, executive functions, and visual spatial skills, but we also think about emotional health, brain health, circadian brain health, right? So the brain has many different things it does, and we don't want to limit measurement to cognition. So with that, I'll turn it over to the other experts in the room who are probably thinking along the same lines, but also have different ideas.
Thank you, Karen. I think that I will definitely redirect you to some others in the room. I should point out that the last point that Karen mentioned, that brain health as impacted by climate change is more than just cognition, that you have to measure other things. And I know that she's talked about a brain health index almost with various different components as I think an important aspect. I would also like others to, keep in mind the other question, how are you actually measuring the stressors, right? And there are many different types of stressors involved. So who wants to go next? Maybe Mohammed, I'll put you on the spot and ask you, and then go to Katerina, and then to Colombia and to Bill as well. So Mohammed, you want to speak a little bit about what your views on how do you measure brain health in a reliable and valid way that's, that cuts across cultures, and or can we just, measure certain domains, that the tools be a little bit flexible, and also your technologies used in measuring environmental stressors.
Thanks, Vaibhav. Yeah, I mean, I might have a more romantic definition of brain health, which is making the best of your brain. So it's not only absence of disease. In this case, we cannot measure in a clinical way brain health, but definitely we should have some metrics to measure it, or some measurement tools. In our study, we are applying the HCAP battery. So it's sort of measuring different cognitive functions and cognitive domains. It's an extensive battery. However, we are more inclined also to have a matrix of measurements. So in addition to diagnostic or cognitive tests like the HCAP or others, we're bringing to the arena biological tests like biomarkers, several sets of biomarkers, and we're trying to have a consensus on how much we can mix and match to have eventually an understanding of determinants of brain health. So I hope this answers the questions, although I don't think so far we cannot measure the brain health by the definitions I mentioned, like brain health is making best of your brain. But at least we can identify sort of brain insult, biomarkers of brain insults, cognitive tests that can show signs of cognitive decline. Mixing together or bringing together can help us. The other question regarding the environmental assessment. So initially we have the extensive survey for the HRS, which is assessing different retrospective exposure. And we have also this understanding that stressors does not mean only environmental pollutants, but others, like psychological stress, socioeconomic stressors, and so on. However, recently we started to adopt certain technologies. So in addition to extensive retrospective surveys or questionnaire, we are using now some sort of basic wristbands, silicone wristbands, trying to copy the body exposure to persistent pollutants, and also linking this to satellite data and remote sensing data to identify back or cumulative exposure to air pollutants like particulate matter, NO2, SO2, and others. So I think this will help us to better identify back or cumulative exposure or retrospective exposure, which has been a major challenge for environmental studies worldwide. Recent technologies, as I mentioned, can help us to improve our understanding of environmental exposure. Recently, in our Al-Sahha study, we are developing a new module dedicated to climate change and the impact of climate change. So through this new module, I think will help us to better understand the impact of climate change on vulnerable population in Egypt, and hopefully this will be extended to the rest of African countries, or at least North African countries, given the nature that North Africa, they are all Arabic speaking, so we can use the same module, which definitely can be later on translated. And finally, your question regarding harmonization. I have a very wise quote usually we use in Egypt here. So if you can't achieve something 100% or completely, you shouldn't also abandon completely. So if we cannot achieve 100% harmonization, we should at least think of maybe 60 or 70. We should accommodate differences, because definitely there will be some differences. There will be missing data from this cohort compared to that cohort. We need a standardized survey or questionnaire or data collection tool, but definitely we should be able to accommodate differences and losing certain data sets and set a cutoff for the minimum data sets required for successful harmonization. Thank you.
Excellent. No, thank you so much. I think you brought up, amongst many excellent points, another important point, that environmental and climate stresses are not just pollutants and air pollution or other types of toxins, but there is also an incredible amount of psychosocial stress that is caused by climate change and climate anxiety that sort of feeds into the overall impact on brain health and cognition. And I know, because I've spoken to a lot of you, different types of stressors and psychosocial stressors are prevalent in different parts of the world. I know in Kilifi, in Kenya, lots of droughts and changes in crop patterns and migratory pressures. In Colombia, right, landslides due to excessive raining and deforestation, and all this leads to psychosocial stress, which has an incredible impact on brain health overall. So I would like to just sort of make that point, bring out that point from everything you said, and so that's an important point. With that, I would like to just continue this thread, and Katrina, maybe move on to you and your views on how to measure brain health in these specific populations, the opportunities to harmonize, and also how to measure environmental stressors that are relevant to your part of the world.
Well, thank you very much. The reason that I am here is because we don't have the innovation that Mohamed and Dr. Karen presented, and we would love to have it. So what we have in terms of brain health is just what she said, the classical instruments, because we didn't have resources nor experts to do otherwise. But we wanted to be able to use standardized instruments also to be comparable. So we have like depressive symptoms, cognitive tests, the instrumental activities of daily living, a concept called social capital. Those have been taken at baseline and every 5 years. Some tests are every 2 years. And we would love to be able to incorporate more sensitive and specific measurements. And I think it's a great idea what the doctor said, considering the domains and then each one see how can you measure better in your population, because with the brain plasticity, probably we are different. I mean, women, I think, that have such a deep variety of roles, diverse roles in society where they are not allowed to study, and others where they are like men, they can, all most doors are open. So probably those brains are different. And if we, for instance, in my population, that is agricultural population, the average mini mental test, for instance, that have been applied the same in all of the country, is lower than Chile. So but they are not with the damage. They are different probably. So that's the thing that I think, or if they have a problem, in which domain will be so much interesting. So I agree that, and I think that's a very challenging goal to be able to accept that you will measure differently. But I love it. I think this is a way forward. So in brain, we are not, we are back compared to the two previous speakers. But our group here in the university, so one thing is new, in 11 years ago, we didn't have brain health as a goal. But for the next 10 years, it's a new research area for us, mental health and environment. Both are, but environment, so I'm moving now to environment. In environment, we have done a good assessment. We have done measurements of soil exposure to metals and pesticides, air pollution. We have put measurements and measurement devices in the household to cover the whole area. And we also have done measurement of pesticides and mycotoxins in urine. And lately we did a pilot. We completed a pilot trying to do exposome using these wrist bracelets. But that was a small pilot with 50 participants, and we are very interested in expanding that along the year also. The other thing that we have been seeing in our area that is very stressful is increasing violence. We have a very important immigration from the rest of South America, Latin America, and there is a lot of the drug related violence have come with them. So this is now in all of my people is top of the line, the violence that they are afraid, of course, more than realistic, based on what the press is doing, with information. And also the droughts. We are an agricultural country. The second source of resources for my country is our fruit. And so people in this area also is stressed because of the climate change effect in their daily living. So this is, we are very happy to include the new ideas for the new application.
Thank you, Katerina. I think, I heard a couple of very important points. One is that, as I was saying earlier, that climate change, displacement due to climate change, immigration, violence, they're all sort of part of the story. And we have to figure out how it all impacts, brain health. And also, fruits being an important part of our economy. Fruits require a lot of pesticide. As climate changes, people use more pesticide, right? So this is a complex web that we look to entangle. But I think the good news is that we are collecting the data that will help us understand these relationships, right? The other thing that I heard from you, Katerina, is a clear call for collaboration, that let's figure out collectively how to measure brain health in a more reliable way using technology that is more scalable and you can get more comparable data. And I think we at the DAC, I should say, already encourage that. So for example, when we work with different cohorts around the world, we try to make sure that we are using technologies, similar technologies, to collect the data so that the data are then comparable. But we can't just be pushing the technologies. We have to also agree on the strategy. And I think this cross-cohort panel is an important way for us to really encourage cross collaborations between cohorts and harmonization, not just of the tools, but also harmonization of approaches and minds in how to sort of approach how to tackle this. So thank you, Katrina. I would like to sort of move quickly to our Colombia friends and have them say a little bit about how are they approaching the difficult task of essentially measuring cognition in a very rural Amazonian forest region of South Colombia, and what are the important environmental stressors due to climate change that they are tracking.
Okay, I think it's an important challenge for this population because it's necessary to identify different factors. It's difficult to identify maybe the product alteration. I think it's difficult because there are different risk factors. I say about the low education, low socioeconomic status, and this situation produce, for example, sometimes the people don't use protection for your body and don't use protocols for a size. But necessary to create a different or harmonize the protocols for to identify maybe that the climate change produce affection in the brains. I think it's necessary to control different variables for identify that it's possible this relationship in brain and change climate.
Thank you, Alfredes. I think we heard your call about wanting to harmonize protocols as much as possible. We would certainly follow up on that. And I think we'll also, again, I want to remind, follow up on, even if we cannot harmonize every tool exactly, can we at least harmonize the domains that we are measuring? Although we at DAC are looking to harmonize tools as well, and we are providing similar technology partners to all our cohorts, as you are well aware. But we will continue to sort of push on this theme. I should also say briefly for everyone's benefit that in Colombia, they have actually generated data showing exposure to pesticide having an impact on cognition, which is an important piece of data. And I know that they are also sort of very interested in some of the work that's happening in Kenya, which is not just to measure brain health, but also understand people's attitudes anthropologically about brain health. And we are looking to harmonize that protocol and make it available to a lot of our cohort partners as well. I just wanted to mention that. I know, Maria, you're bursting at the seams, so maybe just a few words, and then I want to give it to Bill and move on to the next question.
Yeah, just very quickly to point to highlight one aspect that you mentioned earlier about the long-standing view, the long-standing view about a biological approach to brain health. I think we need to widen the scope. We need to really zoom out a little bit here, not a little bit, quite a bit here, to really look at the picture more holistically. We have been largely for too long biased towards biological underpinnings of brain health, mental health. And what we are learning in the context of this diverse population is that the heterogeneity of the factors that can account for brain health. So then the call, as we see and as we are advancing at the moment, is to adopt more holistic approaches to brain health that still look into the biological mechanism, but also expand, as you said, to the psychological, to the social. And by combining this comprehensive framework, what we are learning, for example, comparing population from the South and North, is the actual role that these factors play in driving brain health. So it's not that the factors are different. The factor might be shared, but the actual contribution, the weight of this factor in paving or explaining brain health trajectory and pathway is what seems to be different. This is actually good news because that tells us that we can harmonize. If we learn what are the relative contribution of these various factors in this holistic and an international approach, we can enhance models that can help us predict brain health using pretty much the same tools. And that's something that we are seriously pursuing at the moment in terms of learning about drivers of brain and mental health in the South and North. And we have very good example, I'm happy to share. There is one question very quickly just to address in the chat, because I think it's so interesting. They talk about, there is a question about, can we actually measure and connect specific stressors to brain diseases or specific diseases? And the answer is, yes, we can. Because something that we have learned, and that's why we made the call towards a more holistic approach, is that in populations like in Colombia and in many of the countries that we are dealing with here or discussing might also share this social feature, people have been chronically exposed to stress, anxiety due to long-standing conflict. We have, implementing this biological approach and holistic approach, learned that this chronic exposure to this factor, even if social, can be biologically implemented, meaning that our brain changes, even if we are, let's say, healthy or equipped with robust biological genetic mechanisms, our experiences will eventually shape the way our brain responds to the environment and cope with diseases. So then we do need to adopt a holistic approach, and we are in the perfect place to do that, because this conversation across countries and across diverse population is the right scenario to come up with this protocol. Just that, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think you are starting to touch a little bit upon, what can we do more holistically about these risk factors as well. But I do want to amplify one point Mario made, that in different parts of the world, people might have different resilience and susceptibility to the same risk factors. And it's also quite possible that the prevalence of risk factors is different, but also the percent attributable risk to the same prevalence of risk factors is different in different parts of the world. And I see Karen giving me a thumbs up, which is fantastic, which is as good as it gets. I do want to move on to Bill, which is that, can you take a broader view, Bill? I mean, you at IHME work across many diseases in many countries, many different outcome measures. From your perspective, what do you see as the unique challenges and opportunities in brain health and tying brain health to climate change in particular? And I know you already put some very wise comments in the chat, which we should probably share with everybody in the webinar,
Sure.
not just the host and panelists. But
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Vaibhav. And what I wanted to say to the first part of your question, which will help people understand a little bit about what we're doing in this piece, is we're taking all the great information that's being produced by folks on this panel, but actually also people in the room participating who are generating data. And when that data is made available to us, either directly from a government or from a group, we then can incorporate that into our estimates. And then we're creating these estimates for every country in the world for mental, neurological, and cerebrovascular, which we connect and call brain health. And what we're doing is prevalence, incidence, deaths, and then time spent in illness, and then time lost to early mortality, and then what we call the total disease burden number. So the recent papers that maybe you've seen published about the burden of neurological disorders around the world, for example, those are our estimates coming out. And I just wanted to say I'm very humbled to be on a panel with Katerina and Karen in particular, because when we first started down this journey with Vaibhav and George with the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, and we were talking about the high level numbers, we got to talk to Karen and Katerina about the work they're doing, and it just, the light bulbs went on for us about all the work that needs to be done still to understand the environment, brain health connection, because we have very crude measures, I would say right now at the population level for the impact of, let's say, climate change, toxins, and it's definitely environmental stressors. We're nowhere near where we should be in the risks, the risk exposures, you said, Vaibhav, and then how that translates to disease. So just to be very specific on risk exposure, we aren't thinking about currently in the way we measure a highly individualized risk exposure, in part because we're trying to measure all 8 billion people around the world. But as numbers are developed and as we get information from groups like the cohorts, I think that is something in the future we could be thinking about as a much more tailored risk exposure level. And so what we're thinking about is changes in temperature. What does that do to a risk profile at the population level? And then how does that translate into impacts on specific diseases or pollutants? So we measure air pollution, measure water pollution, measure different pollutants, and then how does that translate? We're not currently at the population level measuring these very specific neurotoxins, but that's the next wave of things we'd like to do. And as Vaibhav knows, we're very interested in differences in cognition and whether there are better tools, again, getting to harmonization, where we could better capture in a culturally neutral way changes in cognition or differences in cognition. So we're not inadvertently introducing biases in the measurement because we don't really have that one useful agnostic tool. Anyway, that's it. I'll let others speak.
No, thank you, Bill. I think you've been a terrific partner from IHME in terms of really opening our eyes also to sort of the the population level work that can be done, which is very, very important to tie to the individual cohort level work that's happening in the cohorts program. Just to sort of give a vision to everybody else. Just for example, looking at the satellite kind of data, right? There are top-down ways of measuring regionally certain environmental stressors like temperature, humidity, air pollution, right? Which can be tied to various outcomes. And then there are bottoms-up way of measuring cognition and individual level pollution or household level pollution. And if we can bring these two together, I think the power of the data goes up a lot. If we can validate, for example, some of the satellite-based measures with data on the ground, then suddenly we turn this measurement to be, we show it to be valid and also very scalable. But also we can look at variations, right? In the same region, a poor person may be working every day in the field and may be highly exposed to heat, and a richer person may be staying inside in air conditioning and may not be exposed to heat. And so there are many sort of variations that we can pick up by combining top-down and bottoms-up data. And we really look forward to working with various cohorts in IHME in really, exploring the full power of this data. We have more questions, but I don't mind spending time on the excellent ones. There is one excellent one, by the way, in the chat, which I do want to throw up to anybody from the panel who wants to take it, which is that when we talk about brain health, right, we have to also worry about the life course, right? Different exposures to different things at different stages of the life, right? Whether you're talking about perinatally, postpartum, as infants, then as grown adults when the brain is already grown. So there is sort of this longitudinal lifespan, but there's also chronic exposure, collecting data longitudinally and looking at cross-sectional exposure over longitudinal exposure. Anybody wants to say a few words about how do you sort of see either the lifespan or even multi-generational effects of prenatal, perinatal exposure?
Well, I can just say, just from a measurement perspective, Vaibhav, one of the things that we're trying to do at IHME is capture the way that disease burden changes from zero, from birth all the way to the end of life. And so the outcomes that we're trying to basically show, then project even into the future, do take into account that that lifetime progression. I think what the question is getting at something even more precise, which is how does the toxin exposure, for example, change the risk profile over time? So that's embedded into our thinking. That's not what we're putting as an output. What we'd be putting out as an output is the way that prevalence, incidence, and overall disease burden change at each stage of life. But you're right that you can flip it around and then explain the inputs too, and the actual neurotoxin burden and what does that mean over time, the kind of buildup effect. Especially, I'm talking about neurotoxins, but it could be anything. It could be the stressors and all the other things we're talking about too. But so that's embedded in our thinking, at least currently.
No, thank you for that. I think I'll just answer this question with a teaser that in many of our cohorts, we are actually going into the household and making measurements. And so we have an incredible opportunity to collect data from everybody in the house. That includes the older parent, the young mother, the infant child, and also maybe the pregnant mother. So we do think that there is an opportunity in a cross-sectional snapshot to measure multi-generational data. Now, of course, you can play it over time, and that takes time. But we have thought about this. We have thought about collecting data from different points in a lifespan simultaneously and relating it to the same stressors. So whoever that put that question can come to us, and we can tell you a little bit more about those opportunities. I have on my part only a few minutes left. There is one more question that I will not ask everybody to answer, but just say that this was a question, and it's a very important question. I want everybody to at least acknowledge this question, which is that we are working with very, very vulnerable populations in some of our cohorts, and we have to be very careful about the ethics of including them in our studies, and want to make sure that when we make measurements on a vulnerable population, we just don't end up with the creamy layer of that vulnerable population, that we actually truly reach a representative population in that particular region, that we reach the socioeconomic spectrum, and we also address the gender diversity, gender issues. And also, I would say that we collect this data ethically and we use it responsibly. So this is a question for everybody, not to answer, but to sort of to make sure that we raise awareness around this issue. And we at the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative make sure that the work that we do has this ethical component built in, and that we are developing algorithms that are fair, are collected, are feeding off of fair data, and that we are recruiting patients and people with full consent, but also doing the ethnographic studies, for example, to really get to the most marginalized populations as well. So I want to acknowledge this very important issue, and then go to my sort of last and third question before I hand it to George. And this question, I think, feeds into some of the broader themes that George will talk about. But I want to set it up by saying that it's great to make these measurements, right? And it's great to make these relationships, perhaps even causal, if not at least correlative, brain health and environmental stressors, understand the mediators, understand the confounders. But what then, right? What are we going to do about it? What are the interventions potentially that we can offer? And we talked about harmonizing the measurement tools, but perhaps the interventions need to be quite customized to local regions. So I invite people from the panel to speak a little bit about what their thoughts on how would they actually intervene based on the insights they generate, and what is the local climate for interventions. Maybe Katerina, I want to start with you, since I know that you have thought about this over time, even with the local health ministries and environmental ministries as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I think for us, it's an obligation, ethical obligation to do something. So for chronic diseases, that was the focus of our first 10 years, other than mental. We are completing an intervention in modifying physical activity, nutrition, and sleep habits in 400 people. It's a subgroup group, and we have been very successful in improving some biomarkers, liver biomarkers, sugar and glycemic sensitivity, insulin sensitivity. And what is interesting is that the mayor in this small town, this is a 50,000 inhabitants town, the mayor was on fire with our results, and she is intervening. She opened the physical and the nutrition part in the local health center, and actually the nutritionist that was the coordinator in our study now has been hired by her, because we finished the intervention and we are just in the long-term follow-up of the intervenees and the controls. But we also, I want to say that we also, whenever we study any condition, the medical doctor that is in charge of that part, she analyze the results and see if we need to send to search for a reference doctor or whatever, or recommendations. And we have a very nice system to help the subject go faster for their medical care. And if we are going to enter into mental health, we have to do something alike. But also we have a problem that maybe the rest of the panelists don't have in their local legislation. We have a very strict ethical law that is very complicated, and we are fighting. So the lawyers in my university and other university are trying to make it more flexible, because it says that if people have mental disease, they are not autonomous to consent, so you cannot do research on them. And this is terrible, because then they are not able, but they can have a diagnosis, but they can still decide to participate or not. So we have this discussion, and also saying that if we cannot study that condition, we are putting them in a in a poorer condition. So it's just for you to know that we have this problem. So we are very careful to say that we are studying the population, not mental disease people, because. But so when we have the finding, we will have a problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Katrina. Anybody else on the panel wants to say a few words about interventions in their region, challenges, opportunities? Mohammed?
Yeah, thanks, Vaibhav. Actually, one of the lessons we learned throughout the journey of several pilots for Al-Sahha is that we shouldn't take things for granted. So usually we tend to think that, for example, what type of knowledge or scientific evidence generated elsewhere could be generalized also in our local context. The first step is actually to understand the local context, is to understand the facts generated from our local environment. Many of the what we call bad stressors or good stimulators proven to be not true in our context. So I guess the first thing, even before harmonization, is to understand the current situation. Many of the amazing results showed that things we are taking for granted, like linking educational level, for example, to cognitive functions or performance, might not be 100% true in certain rural areas. Linking some bad climate change stressors to cognitive decline might not be true facts in other contexts. So I would just like to say that we need first to run fact-finding research locally before we are tending to generalize this on global aspect. Thanks.
I think, Mohammed, you're making the case for getting data from a diverse population with different geographies and cultures, so that you can really understand the impact of various risk factors. Anything you want to say about the climate for, like, anything around actually large scale interventions from your perspective?
The only thing we tried is actually the acceptance of the studied population in Egypt of the fact that there is a climate change. And what was shocking for us is that first, it's still questionable here. They don't believe that we have this sort of climate change or challenge. Another thing, most of them have this response that even if there are some climate change, we don't care. And we're working in the area of aging population. And for them, what's in it for us? Why should we care about climate change if we're not going to live until we will see the impact of climate change? So this is important things that we should start intervening with or thinking of, or a challenge that we should think of meeting.
Thank you, Mohammed. Anybody else wants to add a few comments about how do we go from measurement to intervention?
I just want to add, that's a really excellent point about people not caring, even if they acknowledge climate change. I would say at a macro level, that is a thematic challenge that we on this call should consider, because we have felt similar pushback from audiences who want to acknowledge climate change, but then will note that maybe in their area, wherever they live, the warmer climate is not necessarily bad for them in that moment. And so it's a really very interesting thing to think about, in that that's very country specific, and actually I should say more local than the countries, because within a country, suddenly I'm in the Pacific Northwest, for example, and I've actually heard people say in Seattle, we've had such a nice spring, or we had such a mild winter, right? Well, some of that is because of climate change. And so that's not necessarily a positive thing to have a mild winter in a place that should have regular snow and cold rainy weather, et cetera. So just putting that out there, that is, I think, I said thematic, but I should say a narrative challenge that we all face.
Thank you. I think we are percolating slowly to the level of conversation that is a fine time for me to transition to George. George, you've heard a little bit about the depths of the data that we are collecting, the desire in the cohorts to sort of cross-collaborate on specific technologies for data collection, measurement of both brain health as well as environmental exposures. And we were just beginning to get into some of the larger issues around how to motivate interventions, etc. So with that, George, if you want to just talk to the audience about some of the issues, broader issues as you see it, I think that'll be great.
Well, thank you very much, Vaibhav. I found this conversation so far really fascinating because, quite frankly, I, like a couple of people in the chat, have not appreciated the connection between climate change, toxins, and the like to brain health in the way that you are all studying it. I guess there has been, as you all know, a good deal of public health literature on the range of risk factors or risks, behaviors, or influencers that might affect brain health. And climate change is always identified as one, but it has tended to be at sort of the bottom level of risk factors as compared to diabetes or hypertension or education levels or the like. So I'm curious as to how you are all assessing the relative contribution of the impacts of toxins or pesticides of various characters and heat and stressors as compared to other things that are going on in your cohorts, that is the confounders, so to speak, of what else may be causing brain health conditions to be at lower levels or to be deteriorating differently based upon other characteristics, metabolic or other characteristics. So I'm going to start with Katerina, since you seem to be the object of initial attention in a lot of these questions. Katerina, how do you assess the relative risk, or how do you take account of the other confounders that may be affecting the brain health of the people in the cohorts that you're studying?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the other confounders are the easiest because we collect that information. We collect it at entrance and every 2 years. We have these biological measurements of the metabolic health and all that. So the challenge is environment, because environment is usually an ecological variable. So if we talk about, so if we don't have biomarkers of the exposure of the individual, it will be very difficult to see the association, especially to assess the causative role, the piece of cause that would be attributed to an environmental agency when you don't have a biomarker of exposure. So these are the two situations. When it's an ecological variable, like atmospheric or climate, you need a control population that is not the same. So, and then it's very important to have many cohorts worldwide, especially for these ecological variables. But what we are doing in MAUCO is the individual exposure. this is the only way for us to have an answer in our own population. And that's why our goal is to have this exposome measurement that is, 24 hours measuring all the exposures the individual has. Still, for brain health, the problem is we are talking about chronic exposure. So maybe today's exposure has nothing to do with with the disease. So this is a very important challenge, the environmental exposure. We have done that in Chile for arsenic in drinking water. And arsenic, since it is measured and everybody drinks 2 liters of water a day in this area, it's very easy to estimate the exposure, the dose, since birth today. And we've done that. And we have been able to associate earlier age exposure with 8 or 10 times higher risk than adult age exposures. It's just to tell you that this is something that we cannot answer quickly because it's very complex. We are talking about cumulative chronic exposure. So we have to do a lifetime story of exposure of the individual. But we do have the other. The difficulty is the environmental exposure to measure it well. And also, if it is something that's affecting a whole population, you need a control population unexposed, because then the whole population is exposed. So you will not be able to identify the effect. So it depends on the exposure, the right design, I would say. And I will stop there.
Let me just ask another panelist, let's Mohammed. Let's say there are pesticide potential environmental stressors from pesticides, from water quality, as Katerina just mentioned, from heat stressors, from a variety of environmental characteristics or exposures. How to tease out one from the other, or to make relative weights among these, and to Katerina's point, how can we as a group of cohorts begin to think through how to get comparable data so that maybe the differential exposures in different geographies will tease out a bit of what are the relative contributors to mental health or brain health conditions as a result of differential environmental exposures.
Thanks, George. Actually, I'm smiling because this was one of the dilemmas we were thinking of maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And we published a paper about that, inspired by my PhD advisor by that time. So the credit should go to him. But in any cases, we put some conditions that can satisfy the need to identify special environmental toxin and linking them to a health outcome. So the first thing, we need large population to have statistical power. Definitely, we understand that we'll have complex exposure, but in all cases, usually we have some significant individual exposures or individual toxicants that show some potentials to be candidate as causal or correlated to this health outcome. However, you need to justify specific step after that. One of the things is the scientific or mechanistic correlation. Why should this toxin be thought of as a brain toxin? So this is the first, I would say, is the next step in thinking. So we have to screen the environmental components and identify a panel and say, okay, this one has the greatest weight based on the mechanism of function. And then you need to replicate on other populations in different areas of the world. And here comes the value of harmonization. Still, it's not enough. So you need after that to validate the results or prove the results on other models like in vitro and in vivo animal models. So to be confident.
Recording in progress.
I couldn't say 100%, but if you need some confidence, as I mentioned, first we need a mechanistic study. Why this specific agent is a good candidate to be a brain toxin. Second, you need to replicate the findings on another different cohort in a different population. So having different populations affected by same toxin and ending with the same health outcome could also satisfy the need, but in all cases, you need finally to validate the results on other models in addition to humans. So exposing to animals and in vitro models would satisfy the condition. If you can satisfy the three conditions, definitely you will have a case for specific toxins.
Let me ask, I'm going to move to Karen here. Karen, with what Mohammed just said, where should we look as DAC to other cohorts in different geographies of the world, which are prepared to participate in some, common data approaches, but with clean water or the absence of heat, but maybe with, so where do we find the potential cohorts that we might work with in other parts of the world to expand the work of this group, but make it even more robust because you're going to have larger numbers of people, but also different exposures in ways that can actually be assessed and measured to determine what Mohammed has described.
No, I really agree with everything Mohammed and Katerina have said. It's really, I mean, these are measurement problems, and there's always been complex problems. So we've had, statistics to approach those, and having large samples and having time series, longitudinal samples is key, and having the variability that you're mentioning is key, making sure that you get the full range of exposures, including minimal exposures. Again, we need to know what does it look like with very minimal exposure. So we want the full range, we want heterogeneity in the sample, we want a lot of large samples, and we also want to measure things over time. Time series is our friend here because we can then start to pull apart what are some of the consistent tipping point factors. So one thing we're doing in Kenya with our accelerated aging project is looking at ecological momentary assessments of vitality. When I say vitality, I mean pain, strength, general sense of wellness, brain fog. And we're looking at that. At the same time, we're getting physiologic metrics from wearables. So we can see when people are having less sleep, when they're having exposures to stress, how does that impact over time their physiology and their general sense of vitality? And by then extending these types of time series longitudinal individualized methodologies across cohorts and collecting more exposure, possibly with wearable environmental exposures to toxins, PM 2.5, or heat, temperature, we can then start to pull apart what are the factors that are the tipping points that then lead to someone to show a more accelerated aging phenotype. So I think there's many solutions, and scientists have always worked together to try to do this, again, across, I like what Mohammed said, animal studies, human studies, and all this cross-validation can leave us with a sense of maybe we know something now we didn't know before, and we trust it. So.
I'm the kinds of environmental exposures or stresses you're talking about, at least in theory, contemplate differential interventions. Could be that one has an intervention relating to the elimination or substitution of different toxins or pollutants, so that's a policy intervention. Another might be to identify a biomarker of stressors to determine a mechanism of action in which you could get an anti-stressor therapy. So depending on who you're working with and for what purpose, you might have different collaborators who want to participate in the helpful design of your work so that you can design a policy intervention, a biomedical intervention, or something else. So I'm going to put this to Alfredus, which is a challenging question. Do you work with your policy people in government about what you are doing and what you are finding in ways that might have some sort of potential policy result? Or are you working with any industry players on what you're finding to see whether there's a mechanism of action that can be attacked with treatments? So it's a two-part question, and both of them difficult, but I thought I'd ask it. I'm not hearing
Thank you
anything.
for your
Oh, you got
thank
it.
you for your question. Okay. The finding for this research is the principle that the governments, because the government has a minister in Colombia, this minister is means ciencias. Other form to finding this research is with the student. It's possible to apply different intervention in the community orders. It's possible to apply different social programs with this population. What else? But I think in this moment, I need other fundings for continuing because the principal challenge for this region is the people is poor, lowest socioeconomic status, and maybe difficult to assess. For assessment this population, it's necessary to visit it in the house. And because for the person don't identify the problem, don't identify that has difficult in your memory or in other process. For the person, maybe many times it's not important your cognition because work in daily work in activities that don't use your cognition. For this reason, I think the principal change is to find resources for interview this population.
This is where I think maybe our work together is not just in the scientific and cross-cohort work on what you're doing, but where we talk to PAHO about the potential policy interventions that are appropriate for Latin America, for example, because they have noted to us that dementia is now the third leading cause of death in Latin America. So they are looking for what should be the policy recommendations to governments. And so one of those could very well be the output of the work that you're doing in Colombia or in Chile to basically say, we are studying this and this is something that you ought to pay attention to as a matter of policy within each of the Latin American governments because of the potential opportunity for policy interventions, which might be effective if we can when we can identify the differential impacts of these environmental stressors on populations. So this is an offer that we ought to keep in mind, Vaibhav, as we work with these cohorts as to how it is that we can, at a policy level, potentially be helpful where policy is relevant. To the extent that it is finding a biomarker for stressors and then a target for potential therapeutic interventions, different question. There we can work potentially with the pharma companies or others who may be interested in finding, an anti-stressor intervention, if such a thing is possible, beyond hallucinogenics. I appreciate this. Mario, I didn't get a chance to talk to you. You've got your hand up, so have the last word on this.
A very quick comment, George, which actually links your question to Vaibhav's comment earlier on about intervention that can be tailored to this population. And it's a very general comment about the relevance of involving and engaging the stakeholders in this conversation from the outset. So in our discussion with the Latin American community and the Caribbean community at large, we have learned that there is a very limited understanding about a strategy to involve and engage stakeholders in the process of delivering these solutions. This is important because we have traditionally imported solutions from the north and developed countries, adapted them to their own culture, envisaging that they will work. And in reality, they never do. So then the question is how we can embark on creative strategies that will involve our end users, our population in the process of devising these approaches, bringing the industry sector, government agents to this discussion that we can map out in this conversation realities to needs, to resources, and start paving the way to this solution. We cannot wait until we get to the delivery stage. We need to start this conversation from the development stage. And I think that's something. Yeah.
Mario, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. And you really have led to my concluding remark, which is the extraordinary value of the collaboration here. And our belief at DAC that in fact innovation is as likely to come from, if not more likely to come from low resource environments than from high resource environments, because you are forced to innovate with fewer resources. So I think that is true. That is true here in a high resource country like the United States, where we have low resource environments within the United States. So we're going to find that the requirement to make sure that solutions get to everyone that is exposed to these brain health, neurodegenerative diseases, we're going to have to find lower cost solutions, much more imaginative and probably multifactorial in different ways as a consequence of working with more diverse populations. And that means that innovation is as likely to come from, if not more likely to come from, what we characterize generally as the global South, because you have to work with fewer resources and with greater imagination on the solution to the problem. And so we very much, that is the central core of what DAC is all about, is to link the innovations that can come from the South as well as the North, to put it in very general and gross terms, or from low resource environments and high resource environments, to put it in economic terms, so that in fact we can get solutions to everybody, because most of the people living with this disease are not in the United States and Europe, and they're not all white Caucasians. So we need to find solutions that fit for everyone, and it's going to be a range of solutions. It's going to be differential in character, and it's going to be differential based upon cost and the ability to deliver at what you might generally call the community health level rather than neurologists. It's going to have to come at lower cost and more accessible solutions than the current ones now on the table. Well, I could not be happier than to have all of you on this really first ever cross-cohort innovation panel. The value of this has been enormous in this conversation. We look forward to replicating this with you and with others. And to the extent that you can identify others that you think might be useful to add to this cohort conversation on environmental impacts, please let us know. One that came up in the chat is the possibility of involving NIH's Exposome project, so that in fact the research that they're developing can be available to you as you think through your solutions. But there are a lot of other ideas that have come out of this, at least from me. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your imagination. Most importantly, from a patient perspective, which is what my family is, I appreciate your dedication to this cause, and thank you very much for what you're doing every single day.